Before we jump into the techniques of how to write code using an OOP paradigm, I want to introduce OOP at a higher level. I want to make sure that when you approach a project with the desire to use this paradigm, you know how to look at it and then begin to break it down into its pieces. So first, what is the idea behind OOP? The main idea is that a program is built using objects. But what makes an object? I think the best way to think of an object is to think of it as an entity that includes both data and behaviors. If you think about it, it is really no different than any object in the real world. A great metaphor for an object is a computer. A computer has its own state, which is the data. For example, what you currently have open, what you're reviewing, etc. And it has behaviors. You ask it to do something by sending a message. Send this email. It does that and then updates the state of the computer. You ask an object to do something for you by sending it a message and it responds. It does something to the data with the data in the object. You may or may not see the results depending on how the object is coded, but that doesn't mean the state of the object, the data, hasn't changed. These objects are used to build your program. You may have other code such as a main program to tie things together, but the objects handle the bulk of the programming task. In this section, I want to use a simple example as we begin looking at the techniques used for OOP in JavaScript. We're going to use a room reservation system that a company might use to manage their meeting and trading rooms. Now, we're going to keep this very simple because we're focusing on the paradigm, not the actual code to make this functional. Let's look at this at a high level really quick. So if this is what we're going to be creating, a room reservation system, then we're going to need individual objects representing the rooms. Boardroom, conference room A, conference room B, training room. And they're going to have data. Here's some of the data they may have. Capacity, their schedule, what media they have, whether the room is available, some data like that. And then they're going to have behaviors. Now, the behaviors are going to be methods. But those methods should be placed on a prototype so that we don't have to repeat them for every single object. And so we may have a method which represents behavior for reserving, for checking the schedule, for canceling a reservation, something like that. At a high level, this is the type of example we're going to use as we begin looking at the techniques for using an object-oriented programming paradigm in JavaScript. Now, when object-oriented programming is discussed, there are 4 pillars presented. So I want to introduce the 4 pillars of OOP, and as we move through this section, I will re-emphasize and identify them in our sample code. So first, abstraction. A simple way to think about abstraction is that you are hiding something complex from the user. The user is able to interact and use an object without knowing all the complex processing that is happening behind the scenes in that object. The user only needs to know which methods and properties to access. This helps reduce complexity and makes the code easier to manage. Encapsulation. The objects we create in OOP are really encapsulated units. So encapsulation basically means the bundling of data and methods that work on that data into one unit. In traditional OOP, classes do the encapsulating. When you instantiate a class, you create an instance of it or an object, and we'll look at how we do this in JavaScript. But really, the techniques for creating objects in JavaScript is where the encapsulation occurs. Inheritance. Methods and properties can be inherited. In traditional OOP, classes inherit from other classes. In JavaScript, we have already discussed the prototype. Prototype inheritance is a technique used in JavaScript. Objects can borrow or inherit methods and properties from any object in its prototype chain. Finally, polymorphism. This term means occurring in many different forms. So how does this apply to OOP and specifically to OOP in JavaScript? This simply refers to the ability to call the same method on different objects and each object responding in different ways. So how could this happen in JavaScript? Well, let's say we have two objects that inherit the same method from a prototype. It is possible to change that method at the object level so it behaves differently. Or maybe the same method is not inherited but implemented differently in different objects. Using our example we talked about earlier, maybe reserving the boardroom requires checking the CEO's schedule, while other rooms don't require that. The method would be the same but function differently for the boardroom as opposed to the other rooms. All right, we have talked about the vision of OOP. We have done a quick overview of the 4 pillars of OOP, and we have looked at the example we want to use when covering OOP patterns and techniques in JavaScript. I think that is a good intro, so let's get into it.